first, a quick overview of what this example does. This example contains 3 parts to it. The first is there's a simulated sending application in domain 6. The second piece is there's a simulated receiving application in domain 5. And there's a third domain that's intended to represent your wide area network. And there are 3 different configurations available. The easiest to get started with is not actually a wide area network configuration at all, but it does separate the sending and receiving by using a different domain. And so this is simply the UDP LAN example. After that, there is a TCP LAN example that you can set up. This requires one extra step because you have to actually set up IP addresses in the configuration files for routing service. And then there's a third configuration, the TCP WAN configuration. This configuration potentially can take a lot more configuration because if you really want to actually test this on a wide area network, you may have to set up your routers to do port forwarding. The last thing to note is that the routing service that is on the sending side of this network is actually filtering the data that's being sent before it crosses the wide area network. So this is an example of how you might set up a type of filtering so that you don't flood your wide area network with too much data. So now, to run the sending application, the receiving application, and the routing service instances, the first thing you need to do is open up 4 console windows. Once you've done that, you can change directories into the example directory and then into example code inside of there. Once you do that, you can run the various scripts to start the applications. So I'm going to start a sender, and the first thing you notice is that you have to set up an environment variable called prototyper home. So this example requires that you download the RTI prototyper with Lua experimental release. This isn't because you need Lua to run applications that send data across a wide area network, but we've used that for the simulation so that you can see more interesting data. So I'm going to set the prototyper home to be the directory where I've installed this. Now that I do that, I can run the sender application. Now I'm going to start by running the receiver. So I'm running on the same machine, but you'll see that the sender and receiver do not communicate with each other because they're in different DDS domains. This provides a logical separation so they do not discover each other and they do not communicate with each other. So here my sender and my receiver are running, and now I'm going to start running the routing services. I'm going to run the most simple example of the routing service because this one does not require that you edit the configuration to add the IP addresses that you're trying to contact. Note that when you run the routing service, you have to specify a configuration name, and I'm specifying router 1 here. This is the routing service that's going to be communicating with the sender and another routing service instance. Again, just like with the prototyper scripts, you have to set up an environment variable, and in this case it's to tell the script where the routing service is installed. Now that I've done this, it starts up a copy of the routing service. Now you'll see that the sender and receiver are still not communicating yet because, as I showed before, there's a routing service on either side of this domain 0. So this is communicating in domain 6. This is bridging between domain 6 and domain 0. And this is communicating in domain 5. So right now there's nothing that's bridging between domain 0 and domain 5. So now I will start my last routing service. Now that we have the two routing services, we can actually see, first of all, that data is being received. One of the things to notice is that I mentioned that this routing service here is filtering out data if it's within a certain set of ranges. So all of the temperature data between temperature 32 and 100 is not being sent. It's being filtered before it goes over our logical wide area network. So when you start up the example, you may not see temperature data right away. And as you can see here, I saw temperature data starting from 0 and going up to 31, and now I see no new temperature data. Now, just to reiterate what's happening here, this application is sending temperature data and alarm data. The alarm data gets sent whenever the temperature goes above 100 or below 32. This routing service is routing all alarm data, and it's routing a filtered subset of the temperature data. It's routing it between domain 5 and domain 0. This routing service is routing between domain 0, so it receives the filtered data from router 1, and it's routing it to domain 6, where the receiver lives. And here we see, first of all, an alarm was sent. We received too hot as an alarm, and now we're getting temperature data saying that the temperature is above 100 degrees.